Hi, everybody. My name is Cindy Krum, and I'm the CEO of MobileMoxie based in Denver, Colorado. We do mobile ASO and SEO consulting and have for more than 10 years. This is a talk called Mobile First Indexing, Everything You Need to Know, with a subtitle, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I gave this in Philadelphia last week at the Traffic Think Tank Live. And the idea behind this presentation is that I think that even some of the really great SEOs might be missing the point in terms of mobile first indexing. Google is communicating what they want people to believe about mobile first indexing, but I think a lot of people are just kind of missing some of the larger elements of what's going on and what's been possible now that mobile first indexing has launched. So I want to start by talking about what I'm not going to talk about. There are other talks and lots of great documentation on the official guidelines for Google's mobile first indexing and what you need to know. In general, they basically talk about making sure that desktop and mobile versions of content need to match in terms of content, internal links, schema, and hreflang. Some of the more advanced documentation talks about deferred JavaScript rendering and how mobile first indexing should be able to do a better job with JavaScript. That's all great, and I strongly encourage you to read the documentation, but that's not what we're really going to be talking about today. What I want to talk about is, like I said, what I think people are missing. So let's start with a truism. SEOs love data and analytics. Data is great. We spend a lot of our time analyzing traffic data and looking at what's going on in terms of rankings and click-through and stuff like that. It's super helpful, but I think in some cases, SEOs are looking at the data almost too much and not looking at some other things. But data is great, and even though Google took away some of our keyword reporting when they switched over to not provided, we still can get a lot of really great information out of our analytics packages. And we need this information to make the decisions that we make, especially if you're working on huge enterprise sites, if you have limited development resources, stuff like that. We really need to know that we're making the right decision about our strategy that's going to make the most impact the fastest. So I'm not saying that data and analytics aren't important, but my question for you is, what if the data that you or your SEOs were using was incomplete? That would be a problem, right? That incomplete data leads to bad conclusions, questionable decisions, stuff like that. And so I worry that sometimes SEOs don't realize how incomplete the data that they're using actually is. And so let's take an example, and this is a great one because it really, if an SEO sees this and looks at the data, is like, what? It really kind of makes you stop and think. But we've all been in a situation like this, right? Where you have data coming out of some great data source like Google Search Console, and the data just doesn't make any sense. So what's happened here is the purple line is average position. We've gone from an average position of maybe 10 or 12 on this keyword, an average position of 13 or 14 to an average position of 6 or 5 even in some cases. So that's a huge improvement. But at the same time as that happened, the total clicks for this keyword fell off the map. They're gone. And so when we're faced with stuff like this, where the data is giving us really, really confusing messages that don't make sense, and we can dig in and we can look and try and find, what's really going on here. But I think we've all been in these situations where we can't always explain the data. Or the data just doesn't make sense. So what I thought I'd do today is take you through some case studies about what we're seeing with our clients. And I use the Airstream trailer, #vanlife, because I think it's kind of a good representation of a lot of things on this topic area. Number one, I think SEOs, even the best SEOs, kind of walk around in this pod of reality where they think that what they see on their phone or in their search engine on a computer is what everyone else sees. And it's just not the case, but it's really, really hard to get people out of their pod of reality. The other thing with hashtag van life is that I think that it's kind of a misrepresentation of reality, and I kind of tend to think that the data and even some of the official communication from Google about mobile first indexing does describe reality, but not always super accurately and not always exactly indicative of what you should expect. So when I'm giving you these case studies, what you should know is MobileMoxie has been around for more than 10 years and has specialized in mobile SEO since the beginning. And we didn't specialize in mobile ASO from the beginning because apps didn't even exist when we started doing this. I have a lot of experience. I've written a book about mobile SEO, and so what that means pragmatically is that we actually don't work with companies that don't have teams of SEOs already. We are the SEOs for SEOs. We get brought in when teams of really great, smart SEOs have data that they don't understand, right? They're getting the data. It's not that they're just not tracking. They just look at it and they're like, this doesn't make sense, or I've done everything that the guidelines say and it's not working. What's going on? So we're working with people whose data didn't make sense, and we've had to make sense of the data with additional elements baked in. So I'll walk you through some of these case studies. And the first one has to do with food. And when you look at Instagram, you get this idea about hashtag van life, and you're like, oh man, it's going to be great. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to travel the world and make all these friends, and it's going to be super elegant, and we're going to eat well, and everything's going to be Instagram worthy. And the reality looks a lot more like this, right? Because you have limited space and limited resources, and you're constantly either moving or looking for Wi-Fi or what have you, limited refrigeration. And so this is about as fancy as it usually gets. And this one's fancy because there's wine. So the case study that I want to talk about is food delivery apps. So maybe you're in your Airstream and you decide, you know what, we're not going to cook. We're in the range of a delivery app. Let's just order some great food. And from a SEO perspective, food delivery apps are incredibly complex. From a very basic concept of it all, a food delivery app has lots of queries because you're looking at the restaurants, the food, the types of food, but then you're also looking at the cities. And then they have lots of competition. Food delivery apps have become super trendy. So you have lots of really great competition, DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, and Seamless, Eat Street, all the others. And they're all doing SEO too. And they're probably doing at least somewhat of a similar job. They're all taking likely a similar tack on their SEO strategy. But then the last thing is that they have really complex search. All of these things add up to a search result that is somewhat unpredictable and highly variable. So let's dig into this a little bit more. When you think about the restaurants, all of the restaurants that are out there that a food app might want to work with are also doing their own SEO. So we're competing with people who are somewhat our clients on the supply side. We help them get people ordering their food for delivery, but they have SEO teams. And those teams are doing a great job. And those teams, are trying to drive map packs and trying to drive foot traffic for all of the brands that are in our inventory. And so you get lots of map packs here. And even for delivery kinds of keywords that don't have a restaurant name in them, restaurants are optimizing for delivery in the map pack, which kind of doesn't make sense, right? You don't need a map if you're getting it delivered. The driver might need a map. But they're doing this because they're clever and they're marketers. But then also you have sometimes where the restaurants are tightly affiliated with just one app, and that's listed in their knowledge panel or in their business listing, like this one where Postmates is already there. And so you're like, oh, but what if, I happen to know that this one is available. This restaurant delivers with not just Postmates. How did that happen? How do we fix that? Stuff like that. So then you realize that these apps are competing not just for web traffic, but they're also competing for app traffic. And in fact, for most of the apps, they get longer term, higher long-term value users if they get them to download the app rather than going to the website. And so if you're an SEO team and there's an app team that's also doing their own marketing and their own ASO, you're kind of having to balance your desire to get people to order in the first place or order at all with their desire to get people into the app, registered, and stuff like that. And so if you outrank the apps, that could be potentially good for you and your team, but bad for the company as a whole. And the other thing too is that because of the app nature of these food delivery options, a lot of the queries could also generate app packs. And like I said, app packs could be good for the overall, user base of the business, but not great for SEO. So let's jump into some SEO theory. And let me tell you kind of what we've learned as we look at clients that are dealing with the impact of mobile first indexing. We've been writing a lot about entity first indexing. And I believe that entity first indexing is a better way to describe mobile first indexing. Entity first indexing is essentially mobile first indexing, but the idea is that we believe when Google launched mobile first indexing, the indexing part of that label talks about how Google organizes its index, right? And when you organize an index, the old index, we think, was organized based somewhat on industry or topic a little bit. We know that they had kind of pods, topic pods, but they weren't particularly relational. And we think the switch to mobile first indexing was a switch to organizing the index based on relationships in the knowledge graph. And entity relationships. So an entity is a concept, and different languages can all describe the same concept with different words. So the difference between an entity and a keyword is that the keyword describes the entity, but the entity exists outside of the keyword. So for instance, mother. Mother is a concept that exists in every language, in every culture, right? There's always a mother. Mothers have a specific relationships to daughters and sons and fathers and grandfathers. And those relationships stay the same in every language, regardless of what keywords we use to describe it. And I could even talk to you or communicate with you about the concept of mother without words at all, right? I could show you a picture and you would know, I get it, this is a mother. Or we could have sounds. The sound with mother doesn't work well, but if you think about a train, I could play a sound of a train and you would say, I know, that's a train, right? So we don't need the keywords. The keywords in entity first indexing become modifiers. And that's important for Google because it allows them to take what they know in some languages, and they know these entity relationships to be true, and then build them out in other languages where there are fewer people using the search engine, so they have less ability to machine learn the language independently. So you can kind of cross-apply what you know in this language to say we also assume that these entity relationships exist in that language. And when you do that, when you make keywords and language a modifier of an entity concept, then you can use machine learning faster because it's not being divided by language. The machine learning all goes into the entity rather than going into 50 different languages and the entity afterwards, right? So we change the order and say entity first, then keyword as a modifier. And that's super important for Google to A, learn better, faster, in more languages around the world, right? It's just more efficient for them to do a good job. But B, when we think about voice search, the relationship part becomes more important because we don't have a visual interface for users to help us along or to click what they want. It's much more important in a voice search, for instance, to get the right answer the first time. And you don't have a long list of 10 answers to choose from, you just have the one. And so the entity relationships ensure that Google is better at understanding the query and its relationship to other things, and then having potentially long-term conversational queries. Okay, so that's a lot to think about, but if you just remember that mobile first indexing is probably better described as entity first indexing. And the result of that is going to be just a build out of knowledge graph. Now we're trying to fit all of the web components into a piece of the knowledge graph. And we think that once Google has fit pieces of your website into the knowledge graph where they're really certain that they understand what's going on there, and how it relates to other things, that they're much more likely to create what we're calling hosted inclusions. Hosted inclusions used to just be position 0 results, but now Google started slotting them in all over the place, so they're not always at the top. But a hosted inclusion is something like a knowledge graph, a map pack, an app pack, an answer, rich snippet, stuff like that. And I think that there's a lot of different kinds. Google's testing all of these different kinds of hosted inclusions, but the thing about all of them is they don't necessarily have to have a website associated with them to be a good response. So yes, answers do have a website, but you don't actually need the website for it to be a good response because you get answer to the question in this result. Same thing with app packs. You can't find the website that has this particular app pack. Map pack, same thing. It kind of lives in the cloud. Or in Google's brain and is surfaced without needing the website, even if a website may or may not be there, right? So that's a tough concept. So let's look at pictures. So this is a query on the right for how to reheat a pizza. And what you see is you have pictures of pizza, you have an answer, and then you have people also ask, and then you have some videos. So already Google's trying really hard to answer your question. But if you look back at the top, they have this carousel of other topics, like tacos and frozen pizza and stuff like this. And so in a pan, in the box. And these are the relationships of pizza and reheating pizza. So relationships with pizza can be lateral, like the taco, right? Taco is a different kind of food that people eat a lot, or in a pan, which is vertical. That's a vertical relationship to pizza. Do you want it in a pan? Do you want it in a box? Do you want it frozen? That's describing the pizza. So this is kind of what we're talking about, where Google is trying harder to understand the relationships between the different things and the different queries. But we tend to believe what our research is showing is that there are now basically two kinds of results. There are these hosted inclusions, often in position 0, but not always. And then there's organic blue links that are just links to websites. And Google's trying so hard with the hosted inclusions, and Google understands the hosted inclusions better, that we think Google really wants to focus on the hosted inclusions and use blue link organic results as backup in case we get it wrong. And this makes a lot of sense if you've spent any time in the Google app, which appears to be a lot of hosted inclusions, but it also makes sense from Google's perspective with voice. If they host it, they have more ability to do clever things with it. So the truth is, at least in my mind, Google loves hosted inclusions. They're often in position 0, but not always. But let's look at the food delivery app queries. So this was a query for best delivery app. And the first thing that they show us is found on the web. And it's little branded expanders for each of the major food delivery apps. And then when you click the down button, you actually get more information, like an answer. And so that's a hosted inclusion, because these aren't necessarily linking to websites, or even if they did link to websites, you wouldn't actually need it. They're trying to answer the question right in the SERP by lifting content from other websites. And then the other thing below that is the app pack, and you've just got 3 apps across the top. And so again, if we had an organic result for this query, and if we optimize this query like crazy and we ranked in #1, we're still below the fold. The other thing is, like we said, things like maps. So if I wanted to say order Chili's, the first thing that's going to show up is maps. And Chili's has a lot of restaurants. So they're going to win that. And then below maps is people also ask, right? And they've beat us to the game, right? Because if my client happens to not be Uber Eats, and the first people also ask is, does Chili's have Uber Eats, then that might change my thought process, change my next action. And then the last is knowledge graph. And a lot of the time, the delivery apps will be optimizing for specific things on a menu, flagship items. And so those can get their own knowledge graph. And so this one is particularly interesting because it's Chili's bloomin' onion. Give you a second to think about that. The problem is Chili's doesn't have a bloomin' onion. The bloomin' onion is from Outback Steakhouse. Chili's has, what is it, the Awesome Blossom. Okay, but even though this is a thing that doesn't exist, Google's made a knowledge graph for it. And then below that, you can see for people also search for, and the carousel at the bottom, you can see that different items from Chili's menu are also in the knowledge graph. Chili's onion rings, Chili's fried pickles, Chili's fried steak. So this is a clear example of Google trying to build out their knowledge graph, their understanding of the relationships, even going too far and creating a knowledge graph for something that just doesn't exist. So I believe that anything Google hosts, including things like AMP, where they're using Google Cloud as the CDN, or anything that Google ingests as a feed and then hosts, seems to have an advantage. Google thinks that these are better. Either they're better because Google understands them, or they're better because maybe Google assumes that they're fresher. We don't know, but Google definitely thinks they're better. And I think that part of it is that Google can speak it through Google Home or Google Assistant. If it hosts it, it has an easier time putting it through its own utilities to turn it into a voice result. But they can even translate it. And this is something that most people don't realize is happening. But Google translates the knowledge graph to meet the phone settings, the phone language settings on your phone. So you can see that this query, it's for Guardians of the Galaxy, but it's for Guardians of the Galaxy written in Greek. And then if you look down, the phone setting for this phone is in Japanese. And so the knowledge graph is coming back in Japanese. And in fact, even the images included in there are in Japanese. So Google's understanding that this Guardians of the Galaxy thing is an entity. And the keywords in different languages just describe it. It gets what it is and it gives you the answer, even if the query language doesn't match the phone language. This is just another example where you see the query language this time is in Greek, and that slide's actually wrong. It's not Japanese, it's in English. You can see, or no, it's in Spanish, excuse me, Guardians de la Galaxia. And so the phone language is in Spanish, so it's giving us Guardians of the Galaxy information in Spanish. So this is the power of an entity. The other thing is you can see the beginnings of Google trying to highlight specific pieces of a page, right? And they've actually been doing this for a while in answers. They're lifting the most important part of the page. So you can see on the left, it's the question or the query is what is the use of VPN? And down at the bottom, it shows the answer, but it also, you can see that it's got an amp symbol. When you click through now, Google is highlighting the answer that it's lifted, so that you can see that answer in context. And that seems important, right? That gives us a little bit of insight into how Google is separating what it's showing in the SERP from what's on the web page. It says, this is all we want for this query, even though there's the rest of the stuff. But it also shows that Google can see and highlight. But that's important because they can take what they host, what they lift as an answer, and remix it. This is an example from Google of an AMP story, Giada from Food Network. It's lifting all of these images and pieces of information from different AMP results and remixing them into a story. And they're not necessarily all from the same place. It's just lifted them and made this really engaging piece of content that people love, right? People like these animations, even if it's created by artificial intelligence, right? So this is data from SparkToro. Here I'm covering. Data from SparkToro, and what it talks about is the problem with search results as a whole, especially on mobile, is that anymore Google's doing such a good job of putting all of the information directly in the search that people aren't clicking anymore. And so this is growing in mobile especially, but also growing a little bit in desktop. But this is January 2016 to September 2018. The amount of zero-click results is 61.5%. So that's super high. And Rand does a really great job writing about this. But what it means is that basically for every 100 searches on Google Mobile, 61.5% of those searches don't generate a click at all. 38.5 click on an organic result, and 3.4 click on a paid result. And so what that means is that 61.5% of mobile searches, mobile search data, information about what your customers want, never shows up in your analytics package, because other than Search Console, your analytics package is basically a description of clicks rather than a description of searches. So 61.5% of the data is not in your analytics. And the other thing to know is that mobile now represents more than half of the searches. So if you say, well, that's just mobile, don't worry about it. We're looking at desktop. Mobile is more than half of the searches. So if you're just looking at desktop, you're missing more than half of the searches to begin with already. But even within mobile, if you're only looking at mobile, 61.5% of that data is not represented in your analytics. So a lot of SEOs are making decisions based on 48.5% of the data, at least for mobile. And we shouldn't feel good about that. For more than half of the queries, we're making decisions based on less than half of the results. That's lame. That's not good. That's nothing to be proud of. Let's think about why. Why aren't people clicking? Well, number one, position 0 and hosted inclusion results are just more interesting than blue links. You can see at the top all of the colors, stars, symbols, and then at the bottom, green and blue, boring, 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 boring. Who's going to click when there's all the colors and stars and great stuff at the top? The other thing is people are just getting the answers that they want. Answers, people also know, they're super useful. They give people the answer without them having to click through a website, and users love them. Even if as an SEO you don't, users think they're great. Position 0 results and SERP build-outs are just getting more and more variable. And that's the other thing, is you might know what Google used to be doing, but they're testing so many different kinds of things, like also found on the web, or items of interest. They're trying all of these different things. And so you need to be watching what's actually happening in your search results to know, in the case that something like this found on the web thing hasn't just all of a sudden appeared, right? And that's super useful. You're getting like branded, sorted information with carousels of results. And so people are more likely to click there and get sucked in here before they ever get to the first real organic result. So this is Rob Bucci. He talks about answer carousels. And we already saw one answer carousel with the pizza example, but his data from Stat shows that answer carousels are growing, especially on desktop, which seems a bit backwards to me, but he says the number of answer carousels are growing on both mobile and desktop. They took a particular growth spurt in the middle of December 2018 for both mobile and desktop. And what that looks like is when you have an organic listing, when you're in, let's say, position 1, you have the one link at the top, the first blue link, but when you have the answer carousel or the carousel, you have all of these other links. So it's like having a couple different bites at the apple per se, because you can get Chili's delivery near you, kind of the main page, or you can go to specific cities. So you have more chances for people to click. You have the image, so it looks really great. It looks like a hosted inclusion, but it's maybe somewhere in between. Because it understands that this is the main page and these are pages that that are also related to your query. So that's super useful. But then that means if you're, let's say you're not Grubhub, let's say you're someone who ranks lower than Grubhub, you count this in your analytics package as one position, but it's actually more like 5. So the other thing to know is that the look and feel of position 0 is changing as well. Even with sponsored, you're getting a lot more rich stuff. You're getting a lot more carousels and videos. And so if you think about all of the different kinds of hosted inclusions, the interesting finds, like that one's never actually been at the top. But if you think about all of these things that they're sticking into this search result, sometimes at the top, sometimes in the middle, and you say, well, my analytics package says I'm ranking in position 3 for this keyword, what does that even mean? Because you could be ranking in position 3, but likely with all of the stuff that's happening at the top and some of the stuff that's happening in the middle, position 3 could be more than halfway down the search result. So position 3, even position 1, that's not as compelling for users, and it shouldn't be as compelling for SEOs as a hosted inclusion. So we have things like answers, these are compelling, but we also have Fraggles. Fraggles is something that I've been talking about a lot, and they're kind of like the answer carousels that are showing up in this result as well. But if you look, we have a DoorDash result, and we have this jump to link. And what happens when you click this is not only does it open the page that it's linked to, but it scrolls the page exactly to the answer that you need. And so it's very much like the AMP result, where AMP, when you click through from the answer to the AMP page, it's highlighting the answer. This one is just scrolling right to it. Same thing with these other Fraggles. We have a DoorDash carousel related to pricing, and then we have these horizontal ones as well that are lifting different kinds of posts and kind of conversational results here. But these often, and especially this carousel, and especially this one, it's on the same page as this link, and these are on the same page as each other. But Google is able to scroll directly to them now. Now, you may think that's not a big deal, but that's a huge deal in my mind. And I think it's part of mobile first indexing is they're taking the pieces of content, not the whole page. They're indexing the pieces of content around the knowledge graph to say, here is real knowledge, not just a link to a page, right? They're building out the knowledge. These are also Fraggles, Ultimate Guide to Gluten-Free Eating in Denver. And these are Fraggles that have pictures. And so this is just a top 10 list kind of post, but it's going directly, scrolling directly to that content on the page. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the theory and hosted inclusions and Fraggles. That's, I think, what's really happening that's new with mobile first indexing. But what does that mean for the people in the Airstream when they want to order food? Because frankly, this guy looks like he's about to burn breakfast. So for our clients, what we did is we had a tool that allowed us, that we built, that allowed us to see what a Google result looks like from any address in the world and in any language in the world. And so we started doing a little bit of testing. So you can see we've put US, Alaska, Anchorage, we're at this postcode, we're at this street address if we have a street address. And then we just search for best food delivery app. And we choose 2 phones. I always do 2 phones because it allows you to do an Android and an iOS, and sometimes they're different. They have different results, especially when apps are involved. And so we started running these reports, and we started testing multiple locations and archiving the reports. So we would run some of our top keywords weekly, and then we could see them on a map. And so this is what a result kind of looks like. We have a map with all of the biggest locations. We have the search query. And then we can go and look and say, okay, how does this result look in this particular place? And so when we click the eyeball, we can scroll down and see, how did this SERP actually look? To answer the questions of what else is going on in the search result that's not showing up in our analytics. Where might the 61.5% of 0 clicks be going when they're not clicking on our stuff? So we've got map packs. Map packs were the biggest one here. And then paid was also taking up a lot of space in some cases. But we do have some answer carousels. A bunch of apps. Stuff like that. So with that data, we were able to make a spreadsheet like this, where we took the top 5 keywords and the top 5 cities. So these are generic keywords without a city. And then we checked 2 different page templates to see if one was performing any better than the other. And we color coded it based on the brand of the app that's got stuff showing, right? So pink represents one brand, green represents another, so on and so forth. And then we also noted, are there ads, are there app packs, are there map packs, so that we could see how those were influencing traffic. And we did everyone for iOS and Android. Each keyword was done twice for those. And so then we left the test running, let it archive a bunch of different results so that if people had questions over time, or if, even though historically we hadn't set up the test, so we wouldn't know what happened in history to explain weird traffic bumps, now we archive it every week, these same queries. So when something falls off, we can go and look and say, did something in the SERP change in terms of hosted inclusions, app packs, map packs, what have you. So the other thing that we found after all of our research is that paid was getting a lot of traffic that the organic team didn't really realize. And Google's been doing a lot recently with paid to increase click-through. In the past 6 months, CTR in mobile has increased 125% for paid. And you can see this graph also from SparkToro shows that that growth. So the CTR in mobile is especially changing, but both desktop and mobile are increasing. So that helps us understand things. But let's look, because what we realized from working with multiple clients on stuff like this is that some types of queries, some industries have way more paid than. So that was just 4 paid ads in a row and then a map pack. And so when you have that many ads, if they do what the person wants, the person is much more likely to click on them in mobile, but especially if the ads are super compelling. So Google's been testing including a lot more images and collections in the paid ads. So this is like Bed Bath & Beyond, Walmart, like a collaborative or a, not collaborative, a holistic result where you can just go and see all of the Walmart or all of the Bed Bath & Beyond results. But they also had the one result with a huge picture. Let's look at it again. So we have these collections, see small space food storage, something you need in an Airstream. But then look at this Container Store result. How could someone not want to click on that, right? And then you have a bunch of images, stuff like that. And these guys are getting these extra links in their PPC result as well. So again, knowing this helps us understand if we see a drop off on traffic, we need to look and say, did Google just allow for more paid in this category or for this query all of a sudden? Or is Google making the paid more interesting with images, more star rankings and stuff like that? And it turns out that food delivery is full of ads, and it's got ads even in places that you wouldn't expect. So this example, the first example, shows how to get chilies delivered, a query that's clearly a query that should show like an answer. But it starts with 3 downloadable apps, right? So even if we rank number 1, these are pretty compelling. They've got an install button. If that's all I want to do is install the app, then why would I not click here? Especially if I see the star ratings, right? This is just more compelling than a blue link in organic. But then we've got the ads in the map or in the business listing. You've got a DoorDash ad here. And then when we're in the map, when we're all ready to go, to get in the car, to go to Chipotle, there's another DoorDash ad. So in this case, you can see DoorDash is trying super hard to get you, even when you're grabbing your keys and about to go. Okay, so that's the food story. We learned a lot. We were able to help the SEO team explain the losses to their bosses. Ha ha ha. And also help them feel good that if they were doing the paid, if they were doing stuff in Map Pack, if they were doing stuff in App Pack, if they were getting listed in these found on the web results, that they may still be getting traffic, just not organic traffic or traffic that's harder to attribute to organic in the analytics. So that's the food story. Let's think about another story, another case study. Maybe we're in our Airstream and we're all full, we're done eating, but we just want to relax. We're tired of looking at beautiful sunsets. We want to watch TV. So with this question, we had 2 kinds of TV that a client cared about. They had a local news program that they cared about, and then some kids programming that they cared about. And in this case, what we wanted to see is if you just search for local news, how good is Google at identifying your location and serving the most local news? Are they getting you the most local news, or are they getting you the most local news that has good SEO value? And what we found was that big city news stations did tend to outperform the smaller news stations that were associated with smaller geographic area, and this could have been related to the SEO prowess of the larger stations or just the traffic volume, search volume, and stuff like that. I tend to think it's the latter, because we did a quick look to see how was the SEO on a lot of these sites, and there wasn't anyone that was just killing it in terms of links or title tags any more than anyone else. So it seemed like it was more search volume and click-through volume for those. But we did see that Google was at least doing an okay job of localizing these kinds of TV-oriented queries. And you can see in this one, we have more of the hosted inclusions happening. So we search for local news and we get local news Little Rock, with this carousel, same thing over here. Nothing too wildly different happening between Android and iOS. So we started looking at the radius of how far out do you have to be for one local news result to switch to another. And for that, we built out this tool again, but we built it out to do radius. So we would have one center point, and from that center point, test on an interval out to see where are the search results changing from one to another. And then a similar query, we wanted to see similar but different because SpongeBob isn't local oriented TV content. So we wanted to see what happens when we watch SpongeBob from different locations. Is it always the same? Is it different? And we did a bunch of kids kinds of queries, but this is just one. And what you can see, number one, is that Google was doing actually a lot of testing during one of the weeks that we were testing. So this SpongeBob SquarePants knowledge graph result was the most common, but for a while we did see it go away, but only on Android phones. So Google was testing something related to media and Android. But for the most part, we got these knowledge graph results with the watch buttons. And again, this is super compelling for a user if all they want to do is watch it. They have the ability to do that here. They're super happy, especially if they're either a subscriber to any of these services or if they just don't mind paying the $1.99. And then at the bottom, we have the list of what time is it just live on TV, because that you wouldn't have to pay for, right? Google wants this at the top. They make money here. They get a cut. But if they're not going to get a cut, they at least want to show you what time is it on today. And so the thing that we found here is really when knowledge graph is showing, unless Google is doing a test, the only thing that's really changing in the result is the TV times. What time are things on TV? Because when we change between different locations, they change from Central Time to Eastern Time, and they update the times in the column, right? That's the only thing. But so we did the two kinds of the results, the two kinds of queries, and the 5 keywords in the 5 cities or in the 6 cities, did a similar exercise to show what's ranking where, when is knowledge graph getting in the way, when are app packs getting in the way, and so on. So for this, what you have to understand, the SEO theory behind the importance of this and why I bother telling you, is Google cares a lot about video. Digital video is totally exploding. Mobile video is the largest part that's growing. And if you think about it, it's because people are ditching their cable subscriptions and doing on-demand video watching. They're using Chromecast. They're using things like Netflix, Hulu, YouTube to watch TV instead of paying a cable provider. And they're either doing it watching solely on their phone or tablet or casting from their phone or tablet. And so you can see by 2021, it's expected to be 49% of digital video will be mobile. And now there are more eyes on ads on the web than there are on TV. It's just recently switched. There are more people who see ads that can be advertised to on the web rather than watching TV. So again, Google has a vested interest in being here and showing their ads there. And things like smart TVs and greater connectivity are all helping this grow. But it relates to the other things that we're talking about, and it relates to Google's mission with mobile first indexing, because they want to be showing information all over the place so that they can monetize it better. So this one is an example of a TV search, voice search for Big Buck Bunny. I don't know what it is. It's a short film, apparently. And that piece of information and the relationships to other movies, we think are coming from the knowledge graph. I think that when it's showing this text, that's knowledge graph, and this is a Fraggle. Basically, it's information that's been lifted from the web and shown in another place. And this is a Fraggle that you probably wouldn't actually click on. It's just lifting the information showed you. Here's another example. This one shows hidden figures. So if you want to, for instance, in this case, learn more about one of the main characters portrayed in the movie, Katherine Johnson, you can do a voice search for that, right, through the assistant. And what's important here is this is a video that was created for CES. It's not my video, but it's not CES this year. It's CES 2 years ago. This is stuff Google's been planning since before mobile first indexing launched, right? And I think it's baked in to the larger story. So let's summarize what went on here. Number one, what we found is that your analytics aren't showing you the full picture, that crazy things can happen in the SERP that aren't necessarily your fault. Maybe they are, but they're not necessarily. And that you need to be looking at actual search results that are on the specific device, because things change from device to device, from operating system to operating system, especially between Android and iOS, but also just from your computer to your phone. They definitely change. So you need to be looking at actual results. And if you have any local kind of intent, then you need to be looking in specific locations, potentially in a radius, to see what is actually going on and where does it change. Your bubble is hurting you more than it's helping you. If you think that what you see on your phone is what everyone sees, it's definitely not true. And then last, there's just no substitute for seeing real life mobile search results to know what's going on, potentially to explain to your bosses why organic traffic has gone down or why clicks have gone down. This can help you get out of trouble and not look like an idiot, because you're still, in most of those cases that we saw, your brand is actually still getting the traffic. It's just harder to track back to organic. So at this conference, I gave them a promo code to try the tools for free for 30 days. The promo code is Philly 2019, all caps. And that gets you access to all the tools that I showed so that you can actually do some testing for yourself and see what's happening where are things changing. You can even upload a CSV of 100 addresses and test one keyword at 100 addresses at a time to see how does it change from place to place. So I hope you enjoy trying the tool. Give us any feedback. We'd love hearing what works, what doesn't work, what you need, all of that stuff. We love the feedback. So thanks. That's me.